Thanks for joining me again, everybody. This is JT here. And if you are hearing this, you have once again tuned in to the Consequence of Habit podcast. I've said it a million times. I'm going to say it a million more. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Athletic Brewing Company. It's my opinion, but these guys are single-handedly changing the world of non-alcoholic beer. They've got some competitors out there, man. And I know as that industry grows, it's better for everybody. But there always has to be a leader. And I'm here to say that Athletic Brewing is that, at least to me. So if you want to try out some Athletic Brewing Company, log on to athleticbrewing.com. Use the promo code capital COH20 and you will get 20% off your first order. Man, I love what these guys are doing. All right, this week on the podcast, we welcome Mr. Andy Riise. My man's resume is unreal. I mean, started off as a kid. He was an Eagle Scout as a kid. West Point graduate, played football at West Point, spent 20 years in the Army, he's a field artillery officer. He was assigned to some special operations teams for a while. He's just in an absolute ton. Multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. He is now a mental skills coach for the Cincinnati Reds. He's got a whole bunch of side projects that he'll discuss on the show. But the best thing about him is, as great as that resume is, that's not what he wants to talk about. He actually wants to talk about his failures. He wants to talk about the times he's messed up, what he's learned from it, the correlation between failure and learning. And man, he's just trying to help everyone else around him. Amazing talk. I think this guy's story is awesome, and I really look forward to further conversation with him. So please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Andy Riise. All right, here we are. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This is JT, and welcome back to the Consequence of Habit podcast. Today, we are here with Andy Riise. Andy, man, I appreciate you coming on.
It's really a pleasure to be with you and your audience.
So, first off, before we get into your, I was just, right before we jumped on, I was kind of going through your accolades, and I had read your biography, and we've talked on the phone before, but man, it's impressive. You've got a very impressive record. But before we get into that, let's talk about how our conversation, how we even began talking, how this whole thing kind of came to be. I have on General Martin, retired Major General Martin. He comes on. He kind of tells his story, and then shortly afterwards, you reach out. First of all, what was it about that episode, or what was it about that kind of sparked something in you?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it just really moved me in so many ways. I mean, first of all, I was coming out of spring training. I was driving to the airport, had this amazing transformational experience. I think I was in a good place to kind of reflect on my journey and where I was, just like transition, looking back at my military career. And towards the end, like one of the things that I was really passionate about, working with junior leaders in my last assignment in the military, now working with young elite athletes in baseball and young leaders in business too, on the coaching side. I think not enough people who reach a successful plateau or areas in their career, personally, professionally, they don't talk about the struggles that they've went through and the trials and tribulations, right? And we kind of see the product and the end result, but we don't talk about failures. And I know we're going to unpack failure a little bit too, but like really failure, like when you really screwed up and you've hit rock bottom, and what that's attributed to, and especially when it's related to something that having to do with mental health, and how that's a contributing factor. So when General Martin, a guy who was just incredibly successful, served with him, knew of him, never served alongside him in the same unit, but obviously his reputation, is notwithstanding. I was there in Iraq when he was a brigade commander. I was a young lieutenant. Knew people that served with him as engineers. The guy's legendary, right? And I don't remember hearing about the story about his, when he was the president of NDU, and then what happened, and then the fact that he came out in the story, he had the courage and conviction and candor to kind of talk about it. And then you did such a good job of unpacking that and the questions you asked. And then there was a point towards the end, you started having the conversation about like, hey, what needs to be done, And I just to me, and you knew you know, and you hear your voice and you hear him, and you guys knew this was a really special conversation, right?
Yeah.
And when you know that and you feel that, and it's powerful, and you, the listener, that comes through to you, that's just really cool. And so to me, it just really got me spinning, man. It got my flywheel moving and inspired me. And so I just felt compelled to reach out to you, to compliment you. And, you know, I really wanted to reach out to General Martin, which I'm now in touch with him.
Sure.
And we're going to get together here in Florida at some point in time, and really kind of chop it up and talk about our experiences and the struggle later in our careers. Yeah. But also just to kind of talk about what I'm calling the unconventional warfare of the mind, you know, and I think that you're passionate about that. I think the people who are listening in are passionate about that. And we really need to get after that for everyone's well-being and their performance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I very much appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate the kind words, and you're right. So, and we don't even need to go into details, but there was just an interaction back and forth. And between you and General Martin, and in my mind, I said, if that was the only episode that ever happened, and I mean, no disrespect to any other guests, but to me, it was like exactly what this whole thing was about. So it meant, I mean, an absolute ton to me as well. But, all right, well, let's first of all, let's get into a little bit of your background. I mean, Eagle Scout, West Point grad, football player at West Point, field artillery officer, multiple deployments, Iraq, Afghanistan. You're now is a mental skills coach for the Cincinnati Reds. Good God, man, you've fit a lot in a short period of time. Very impressive. But tell us, first of all, where you're from, and then fill in all of the other gaps between everything else I mentioned.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it the Reader's Digest version, because you know, but because I am definitely not my resume, and the people know me best, and even you're getting to know me now. I mean, it's not about the peaks that you see on the resume. It's about the valleys and the swamps and deserts that I've been through. You know, that's where we live our life. You know, I'm actually I'm more proud of my failure resume than I am of my actual resume. You know, I almost wish we could kind of hang our hats on that in our stories. But I'm originally from Northern California, a little town in the Central Valley called Oakdale. It's not your typical California. You could probably cut it out as a puzzle piece and put it into Texas, where I live now. Mm-hmm. Small town. You know, I had a great childhood. You know, my parents, my four sisters, you know, great family, great upbringing, love the outdoors. My mom says I was born with a ball in my hands and full of energy, and was a guy who just, you know, as that Navy SEAL thing, not to compare myself to any of those guys, but the gentleman who said that he was born with a rocket strapped to his back, you know, that was me for sure, you know, and it was just a matter of directing it in the right way. My parents did an awesome job of doing that. And so my outlet was really in the outdoors and Boy Scouts, and just what an awesome place, a playground I grew up in. And then in my sports that I played were really team sports, and I'm a team sport guy, and that's why I ended up staying in the military, because it's the ultimate team sport. But love playing baseball, soccer, football was my vehicle to, you know, baseball as well, but football wasn't really my vehicle to go to the next level, to get recruited to play at West Point. My brother-in-law was killed, and he was an Army officer with my sister. In 1994, he was killed. And a bunch of his friends and teammates came back, and they had, you know, a chance to kind of get to know me. And at the time, I had showed some potential to play at the next level. One of them was a guy named Brother Ratliff. Shout out to Brother, who played football at West Point in 1988. Reached out to one of his teammates who recruited California, gave him my VHS tape, and then I ended up going to the preparatory school at West Point. It's really, you know, I'm 17 years old, and this is where I was really kind of leaning in and getting, things got hard fast. You know, I really struggled academically, was doing well on the football field, but barely got in. I got into West Point the last day. And then, you know, at the time, I didn't even think I was going to get into West Point. And that was really just the beginning of the journey, and a glorious struggle, I guess you could say. It's a crucible that beats you down, that 47-month experience that, and I think that when I really found sports psychology was when I was really, you know, probably at my lowest point. And that really kind of helped me get unstuck and to get out. You know, I was getting my own way on the football field. I was really struggling in the classroom, was barely keeping my head above water. But the West Point Center for Enhanced Performance, which brings the best practices of sport and performance psychology into the military. That's really the point of entry for that, which was started in 1993 by Colonel Louis Choka, who's a great friend and mentor. If he's listening, shout out to him. At the time, I was working with a guy named Captain Carl Olson. and just started working on one-on-one. And I didn't know at the time, but it became, not just what I did as far as working the mental game and how it translated to the football field and to the academics, especially on the STEM side. West Point's one of the hardest, schools academically in the country, and I'm playing Division I football. I'm doing everything having to do with militarily. And it just translated really well. It helped me get through that. And then, it just really, as I got commissioned and became a field artillery officer, 22 years old, I found myself into combat. At the same time, General Martin was a brigade commander, and leading 30 men and women in combat. And we pretty quickly found that the war that we had trained for was not the war that we actually were fighting against an enemy that didn't fight fair.
Sure.
So really the mental, emotional, and social part of your training really became a premium. And we had not deliberately and intentionally developed that in a holistic way. We weren't talking about mental fitness. We weren't talking about, to put in an example, the stigma was very real. Like we didn't even in the military then, and now we don't even call it mental health. We call it behavioral health because there's such a stigma associated with it too. But I think, combat is the ultimate thinking person's game. It's the ultimate mental game and mental challenge. And I think that's where I really fell back on my training that I had at West Point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole sports side, on the sports psychology and the mental performance, and you've had posts recently, and we talk about baseball and about being in slumps and what that does to somebody mentally. And then you add something like combat. I mean, did these things translate over? Was this something, as far as in a leadership role, you were able to bring right from West Point and start integrating within the troops serving under you?
Absolutely. Because I think what the Army is really great about teaching leadership, but when you think about the things that carry the day as a leader in terms, it's really the intangible attributes, right? Like confidence despite setbacks, composure in extreme circumstances, situational awareness and concentration amidst distractions, your goal orientation, your drive, and those things like psychological flexibility and mental agility. I mean, those are skills, those are learned behaviors, right? It's not just something. They can be byproducts of really good physical, technical, and tactical training, and even team building, right? But if you don't get after them deliberately as a skill, then you're really leaving a lot to chance, especially when the stakes are at the highest, right? So for me, it was a direct translation, right? And I'm very passionate, especially early in the war when we had to make pivots in real time, right? Mm-hmm. The way we were trained and equipped to deal with the asymmetric threat and an enemy that wasn't fighting fair, who lived amongst the people. We didn't know who was friend or foe. We didn't have the right armor. We didn't have the right equipment. And frankly, we hadn't trained for what we were up against. And as a, field artillery officer, quickly it was now transitioning to other roles that I had not prepared for, and so like the classic example, when I later was a combat advisor, which was my first foray into, I call combat coaching. And I really identify with being a coach now and helping people in the arena. But like that, I was not trained properly to go do that mission. Now we do that. Combat advisors have been around probably since the Vietnam War, probably even arguably before that. But, flash forward, I'm training, advising, assisting the Iraqi army. I only had 3 months of training with essentially 12 strangers. I'm now operating in Mosul, Iraq, in the most hostile operating environment in the war in 2008. And, and again, this is, you think about years later, but 10 years later, ISIS is there. Right. And that's where all the primary fighting was. And when they made that push back into Iraq, we had to go push them back out again. So for me, falling back, if you can't train for everything physically, technically, and tactically, you can train for that mentally and fall back on that. And that increases your decision-making, your flexibility. You're likely to be able to adapt and overcome to meet any type of situation, right? Knowing that, hey, I can't train for everything, and nothing really quite replicates what's like getting shot at, blown up, being able to do the things that you need to do in a really complex operating environment where there's so many variables that it evolves in real time as well.
Your experience, I mean, coming from West Point and then actually learning about this stuff, because you hear the word resiliency a lot now, right? There's something that it's a really hot word. And somebody's ability to adapt. And I guess that's probably the same thing, right? Being resilient. How much of that do you think is just fits into somebody's personality, where it's almost like a genetic, it's like some people are just funny, like they have a good sense of humor, or, and I've met people And we've talked a little bit about, even when I was in the military and I was trying out for special operations within the Air Force. And I saw people that were on another level of resiliency.
Sure.
And I was always so impressed by it.
Sure.
And I couldn't figure it out. And I've wondered, what is the difference between those people? And one of my best friends is, I mean, in the military, he was just a stud, right? Like no matter what he did, he was whatever unit. I think of some of the most elite units that you can be assigned to. This guy was in it, and I was like, what's different about these people? What is it? And you've had some opportunities to be assigned to some special operations groups while you're in the military. Give us your thoughts. And God knows we've talked enough about that podcast. And what is the name of the podcast that we both listened to? What was it?
Oh man, that was The Line.
Anyone out there, if you want a great podcast and you've actually, what's the guy who put that out? Do you remember his name?
Oh gosh, and it's funny. I reached out to him too.
I'll put
what an amazing story. It was so well done how he crafted that. Yeah.
But getting back to resiliency, what has been your experience of that? How is that natural in some people? And then how are people actually training towards it?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question from a couple different angles, because that's just been interesting. Definitely a theme in my career and area of interest, right? So I'll talk like academically and with the research, and then I'll kind of talk about the practical application of being like an end user and working and supporting really elite populations in the military now and in professional sports. So when I went back to West Point to teach at the same Center for Enhanced Performance, I really came there at a really cool time, because the Army was now adopting this holistic fitness concept. We had more soldiers kill themselves in Iraq and Afghanistan than we had lost in those two fronts combined. Really suicide epidemic. We talk about veteran suicide now, of course, is still a big problem, but Congress was poking the chief of staff of the Army in the chest at the time, saying, hey, what are we going to do about this, right? And so we formed what's called a Tiger Team. It's kind of a committee of experts. One of them is from the University of Pennsylvania's resiliency program, and that was led by Dr. Martin Seligman, which you think about learning optimism and with giants in the modern psychology like Ellis and Zimbardo, and Seligman's right up there with him. But really, the person who was really the force behind this from a teaching perspective is Dr. Karen Rivich. Shout out to Karen. Hopefully she's listening to this. I'll send this to her, who's an amazing practitioner who wrote The Resilience Factor. And we were combining, also what we were doing at West Point at the time, because we really had a vehicle to be able to implement this with the Army Center for Enhanced Performance, starting with Special Forces units at Fort Bragg. Now we have 30 sites and almost 300 people all over the world. And so this is really early on, and we developed this resiliency training program. And unfortunately, the way it was an industrial model, how we rolled it out, I think that was flawed. And I think since then we've learned from that in terms of how we apply what's now called holistic health and fitness in the military, specifically the Army. But being around these giants and in the field of psychology, what we found is so some of these traits, if you will, are innate. We're born with them. We have a predisposition towards them, like in terms of how we cope and deal with adversity. For example, but 80% of, I would say 80, 40 plus or more of that is a learned behavior. And that's what Seligman found out early in his research, along with others, is that this idea about learned optimism. Like they discovered, hey, most of psychology up to this point was looking at, hey, what caused people to be helplessness and fall into despair and lead to anxiety, depression, and lead to other behavioral outcomes like suicide, so forth, right? Other forms of psychopathology, right? Illness and injury. But what Seligman did is he looked at, and Karen looked at it as like, hey, what is it that makes people more optimistic, right? And we found out what it has to do with that too. And they found out, hey, it has to do with how you see yourself, see your others in the situation that you're up against. What is your explanatory style? What do you say to yourself, right? And then, also, how do you engage, with others from a social perspective, right? And then also how do you learn from adversity as well too? So those are just a few of the components that went into it. But by and large, resilience, which is the ability and willingness to be able to bounce back, is a learned behavior. I call that, from a psychological perspective, playing defense, right? So if you look at this like a football term, and of course I'm a football guy, but translates to baseball or whatever in life, I think you have to have the combination of cognitive skills, right? And I think, when you think about resilience, that's the ability to be able to bounce back. That's like being able to play defense, and championship defense is what wins consistently, right? You got to have a stout defense. But on the performance side of psychology, beyond just coping and dealing with difficulties, when I have a bad day, or, somebody cuts me off in traffic, or even worse, when, hey, I have a loved one who dies, or for me, when I lost friends in combat, I just lost a friend to suicide. How I see that and deal with that is one thing, to bounce back. But what I am more concerned with, not just your ability to be a bounce back and play defense, I want to play offense. I want to score points with points on the board. And from my perspective, that's where sport and performance psychology comes in, because performance is about executing tasks consistently up at the upper range of your potential, regardless of the outcomes, right? So if I have a set of skills that I can use that can help me not only, span the whole spectrum of psychology. So, hey, if I'm injured or if I have a psychopathology, I'm injured, an illness, and I need therapy, I can go do that. At the same time, if I need to be able to sustain myself, and it's kind of like going to the athletic trainer, physical trainer, right? To where I just need to, rehab from an injury. I got that ability. But then what is the upper band of my potential to where I can use a similar set of skills or different set of skills to then kick ass between the ears and then influence others to do the same? And for me, the field does not currently, span that spectrum. We're seeing that, and especially in my field, you see the Association for Applied Sports Psychology talk about that spectrum, but it's not very clear in terms of our practice, right? So for the people who need to go see someone, it's very isolated, it's very siloed. And one of my missions in life is to really, as a practitioner, be able to span that spectrum so people can get what they need, knowing that you're going to be, performing really, really well, but you may be experiencing pathology, right? So as someone who suffers from PTSD and has TBI, and I've been, anxious and depressed to the point where, maybe I've wanted to check myself into the hospital, right? Mm-hmm. But I still was relatively high performing at work. I didn't have my A game, but I had a C game, Yeah. And so I wasn't in despair, right? So I was resilient. I wasn't thriving, but I was surviving at the same time. And so we operate along that spectrum, sometimes even simultaneously. And we don't know a lot about how that works, but it needs to be explored further and talked about even more.
Yeah, I feel you hit a couple things. I really want to make sure that we cover, but I've experienced that. I've experienced where I've probably been mentally in some of the worst spots in my life, but on a professional level, performed. I would say I was kicking ass. I was feeling great. There were some telltale signs when I look back, but that is two things where you kind of hold those two things at the same time. Yeah. The problem is, I think there's a shelf life to that, especially, and I've said it a ton of times before. The problem is you are by yourself at some point, right? Like you're not on the field at some point, and it's just you looking in a mirror, or you laying in bed, and that's where that where you are between your ears is going to really take effect. So
absolutely, yeah, and I think a bridging concept we need to talk about too is grit, which is you look at Angela Duckworth, also came from the University of Pennsylvania. Which is passion and perseverance, and I think it's more of a strategy standpoint too. So, I think the grit is really a bridging concept that I like that expands between resilience and performance, in my opinion, right? When I take a look at how it all fits into. So I think about, and ironically, she studied a lot of West Point cadets when she looked at grit amongst the populations that she, did some comparative analysis on too. But I'm with you, JT. Like, I think my last 2 years of my Army career, I was, performing optimally, but I was depressed. Yeah. I was really waffling back from depression from my lowest point. Like I said, I made a huge mistake in my career that, I was very fortunate. I had some senior leaders, people like General Martin, who really gave me a second chance. But then just because of the way the system was set up, at no fault of the Army's, it just was like, I just kept on, I was hanging on being crucified. Sure. In a way, and it just was this cloud and funk I could not shake, and I just, so I was like kind of operating in this optimal function, but every time, I turned the corner, it seemed like something else was happening. I lost my rank. I had got my rank back, something else happened, and I was just going through this gauntlet of perseverance. I look back now and I think, okay, yeah, that made me stronger. Right. And then, so when I was retiring, no, F that. I'm refiring, man. Like I am launching. And so I'm using what I just went through as fuel, rocket fuel. And I feel like that, but it had not for me because it's never been about me. It's about serving and helping others. I want to be an example for that. You can go through hard things, you can experience different points of that spectrum, and you can still really kick ass and help other people do the same thing.
As you said it, I wrote it down to be able to kick ass between the ears and then help others do the same. And that concept, I've been asked about a couple of different times, like, hey man, your podcast, you've got all kinds of people. I've had professional athletes. I've got people like yourself. The last episode is somebody who really suffered from substance misuse, could have killed themselves, almost did. Right. And I love the fact when people end up making that change, they get through, they use that grit, right? Their resiliency, whatever, and they end up coming through the other side. And then it becomes a mission.
That's right.
I say throw life vest out to everyone else around you, because you're going to have an empathy like nobody else will when you see somebody that suffers like you did.
That's right.
I've had 2 back surgeries, and before I've had back surgeries and someone said, dude, my back is killing me, I was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, sure. I'm sure it does. Let's keep doing whatever we're going to do.
Fuck it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And then my back's jacked up. I need a surgery. And now someone says my back is sore. I'm like, dude, you need to sit down, relax. Let's take it easy. It's completely changed my concept of a hurt back. So my point is that I love that concept of getting through it, taking those skills, and then trying to help other people come along with you. Because when I go back through your resume, and start out from an Eagle Scout, going through West Point, having these things where you probably are the tip of the spear when it comes to like ethics and doing the right thing. So I don't know any of the specifics, and they're not important, but to have that question by you had to be a blow to your identity and made you really have to dig deep and think about things.
It really did. Yeah. Cause you just start to question everything, right? You're like, and I think was it, again, a resilient behavior is this a one-time one thing, or is it all the time everything? And I think I started to really then explore things having to do with character, right? Cause when your character is brought into question, I mean, that, your honor and your integrity is all you have, and when I went to West Point, it was the honor code was almost beaten into me. Right. Yeah. And it's unfair to say this, but people from service academies are held to a higher standard that way. And I found that out firsthand. Right. And so, when that gets called into question, it's really, hurtful,
Sure.
And you start to ask yourself, like, okay, well, am I a liar? Am I a dishonorable person? Did I just make a mistake and I acted out of fear, and maybe contributing factors were part of it, and it's a tough thing too, because people look at it as like, and General Martin experience talked about this well, is that they're like, everything is an excuse. Everything other than just owning it completely is a complete, excuse, and it's unacceptable. Right. And I think we judge people pretty harshly. And I think, I look back at my career, especially as a young officer. It's interesting in the military because you're the judge, jury, and executioner, right? Especially when and whenever you're in these positions, especially as an officer, you got a lot of power and responsibility, right? But you haven't really ever experienced failure. Like, you probably made mistakes a lot. Like, as a lieutenant, I made a ton of mistakes, right? But those mistakes had minimal risk and not as much consequences, right? There were a lot of high risk and a lot of consequences. Like, so everybody talks about failure as this binary thing, is either success or failure, but really, and that you should fail forward and fast and use it as fuel. And it's all these platitudes. It's all bullshit, because actually you should need to look at it as a spectrum. Right. And I would challenge people to take a design thinking approach to it too, to where we're taking a more empathetic approach to how we're seeing ourselves and others. When we have the calculus, of our planning and preparation, we think about, the perspective of others, and we have an empathetic approach, and then we continue to be able to develop prototypes, and we iterate and we experiment to where it allows us to be able to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, because just because you make a mistake and fail, it does not equal learning, right? It does not equal growth. It's not a causational relationship. It's a correlational relationship, to where you make a mistake, you may learn from it. If somebody else makes a mistake, probably less likely, but you may learn from it. but it's a deliberate, intentional process to be able to have an action and a reaction to where you learn from that. We actually reflect on it and have lessons learned, and then, or you are in the moment and you actually sit with the dissonance of this. I'm in this situation to where I'm making a decision. It is, am I thinking fast or slow? Like Kahneman says, right? Am I training or trusting myself? And having been in that position now to where, I was not thinking rationally for whatever reason, and I made a series of decisions that I completely regret. It's like, I just kept on, and someone was really hard on themselves. I kept on going back to the why and the why, and I just beat the hell out of myself until I finally started to learn how to be compassionate, and to really to trust the fact that, this was not who I am. Mm-hmm. This was just a temporary thing. And I think the most important thing that we got to take into account is having our blind spots exposed and to shine a light on those, like in terms of feedback, and in ways that are objective as possible, right? Because I think it's easy to surround ourselves with people who want, and our team, like Team Andy or Team JT.
Yep.
And there may be reinforcing things that you don't need to see, right? So you need to have this objective executive committee, right? And, so you get, which is comprised of people who are on your team, but other people who are going to tell you the truth, right? And I was lucky that I had a group of people who knew me, and they're like, you know what? This is not the real you. This was at one time and one thing, and they weren't shooting rainbows and sunshine at my ass. And they would tell me, hey, look, I don't condone what you did, and you screwed up. You screwed up bad, and you deserve to be punished. And I don't condone, but hey, look, this is not, this is not what an indictment on your character, man.
Yeah.
And I think that was the saving grace for me to then begin to forgive myself. But until I had that light shine on me, I really wasn't able to start to forgive myself.
Yeah, when I look back, that's one thing I wish I was better at. I had avoided conflict for a long time in my life, and so there's a lot of times I think I should have either spoke up when you see somebody else messing up, because that's what a true friend does, in the correct way.
Right.
And I just wasn't genuine, and I think it was I heard. Sam Harris, who's another podcast that I just absolutely love, Sam Harris, and they were calling it like, I don't know if it was moral bravery of just actually speaking what's on your mind and not just going along. Like I was a people pleaser as a kid, right? So of actually be like, no, I don't agree with you. I don't agree with what you're doing, and this is the reason why. But I'm going off on a whole nother tangent. But but yeah, I definitely. It's great to surround yourself with people. It's not what comes natural to surround yourself by people that will hold you accountable.
That's right.
But it is what a gift to have people that know you well enough to say like, this isn't you, but just right now, this version of you is fucking up. Yeah,
for sure. And I think the so what too is why character development is so important, right? And understanding what that is. I was lucky enough, ironically, in that my last 2 years, I had some really phenomenal practitioners and some in looking at who actually were, a lot of people don't know this, our chaplains are our proponents for anything character development, right? And again, I go back to the character development we at West Point, and I feel like it was a lot of do nots. Like, you even look at the cadet honor code. A cadet should not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. And now I teach at Texas A&M, they have the same honor code. I mean, let's just break that down for a minute. Just that in and of itself, but it's emblazoned in marble everywhere. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't tolerate those who do. I mean, this, JT. How's the brain work? The brain doesn't differentiate between do and do not. Right. So essentially, like what I've done is then I primed your brain into behaviors you don't want. It'd be like going to the rifle range and telling you to not miss the target, right? What I want you to do is I want to cue your brain to be what you want I want you to focus in on, right? Yeah. So let's just reverse that, right? So, what is, so the opposite of lying is telling, being honorable and telling the truth. It's not cheating, right? Hey, hey, even if I don't know the right answers or if I'm not prepared, it's better to be able to fail the test than to find a way out of it, right? Or to be able to work the system, and, how do I hold other people accountable the right way? I think that when I was teaching the Air Force Academy, And I think the Academy has done a paradigm shift with that too. But this is just where I was coming from. And so I wonder in some ways if that stuck with me, and if I, especially in the special operations community where you kind of operate in this gray period. And I was very comfortable operating in that gray period where it's not always black and white in terms of the right and wrong thing, and we're put in these situations what we're asked to do. And the line does a great job of talking about these, ethical dilemmas that we get put in, to where we're thinking, fast, but at the end of you can second guess yourself very easily if it's coming from a different perspective, especially if it came in from a different angle of somebody who's looking at it who doesn't have the right context in the time and space. And I think for me, I think it's so important that our leaders include character development. So for me, that's all about, understanding your values, your principles that you live by, not only in terms of your personal values, but organizationally, and a lot of great research talks about linking values with actions in high performing organizations. And it's understanding your beliefs, and your belief system. It's understanding your purpose or your mission. And then that affects how you make ethical and moral decisions, or ethics being the standards that are, shared by a group. For example, like as a sport and performance psychology coach, we have a set of ethical principles, but the morals are kind of like your understanding of what right and wrong is. And it's ironic that in behavioral science research is what really looks at, the character piece, but we don't talk about that a lot in my field. So to me, you can't talk about mental performance and resilience if you're not talking about character. Yeah. They're synonymous. Actually, they're foundational, I think. And so that's another thing that I'm really passionate about teaching coaches and leaders about, because of some of the struggles that I went through, and because of maybe some ways that I wish that I was taught character in a better way.
Yeah, I don't think it's talked about near enough. I mean, you were surrounded by people that are discussing that, whether it be in the Scouts, from an early age, and it certainly is. But for your average person out there, and I think that's why like Stoicism has been a big part of my journey in the past couple of years, and a lot of it's a hot topic now, where philosophy in itself hasn't been discussed. Maybe it is a little bit in college, but we don't. Yeah. I just had another gentleman on named Ben O'Brien, and I don't know if his episode's coming out first or yours, but he said he came to this pinnacle in his life, and someone asked him, what are your principles and your values? Mm-hmm. And he was like, wow, man, I hadn't even really thought about it.
Yeah.
And that has helped guide him since then, because there is you want to talk about ownership. When I first started this whole thing was like, hey, I had this idea of who I am as a person, and that wasn't reality. And these are the reasons why. This is what was contaminating it. This was what was compromising these things. And if you don't have those principles, man, you're just along for the ride. You're not, I think it really helps with the decision making, everything after the point, because that simplifies what type of person you want to be.
That's right. And it also has to do with a cultural fit as well too, JT, as you know. I mean, that was the first question that I asked the Reds, because as I was, working in Major League Baseball and venturing into that too, I'll never forget, I interviewed for a team that I won't mention, walking through their spring training home, and this beautiful murals on the wall. It's this amazing, immaculate facility. I mean, the mural had all these, these kind of words, that were up on there too, with all these other images of players that are famous in the face of the franchise. And I stopped and I was like, hey, this is really cool. Are these your values? And the person who gave me the interview was like, well, no, that's just like a, motivational thing on the wall. Yeah. And and that kind of struck me. I was like, that's some bull crap.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is exactly the part of the problem. Must be like, remember those 90s posters, like, goal setting and leadership, sure. And it's the eagle flying over the lake, they're just so cheesy as all hell. I mean, if it's, that stuff isn't, if it isn't reflecting, who you are as an organization, as a team, and what you're about and how you go about your business, then it doesn't matter, and so it just, it's garbage. So for me, like the Reds, that was the first thing I asked, like, hey, what are your values? And what does that look like in action? And they had not only a great answer, but I now see that in action at every level of the organization. We talk about ACR, talk about being authentic. We talk about, being connected, and we talk about being relentless in our pursuit of everything too. And that's something that, is reinforced, can we be better at it, hold ourselves accountable of that? Are we perfectly aligned with baseball operations and, in the front office, as far as what our corporate folks do? Not necessarily. Hey, we could get better, just like any other organization that way too. But I will tell you, down where the rubber meets the road, where the players and the coaches are, like we're doing our best to live those values and get better at them every single day. And it makes a big difference in terms of how you develop as people and as performers.
How do you balance the fact that, and I'm completely speculating, but I imagine this is to be true, that you can have a player who's just got, a ton of tenacity. They've got amazing habits and dedication, but it's towards the game of baseball.
Yeah.
And we've all seen professional athletes where they can be outstanding athletes, but that those values don't translate into their own personal life. How do those type of conversations happen with players, and how do you get buy-in on having an all-around person compared to just a great baseball player?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I say this, that, my job is to make better men because they're Reds, right? And I mean that with the utmost sincerity. I could say that it's not just a bumper sticker, right? Because to me, it's all about, what we don't talk about is that, hey, I'm in I support all our minor league system. The overwhelming majority of these guys are going to invest a significant amount of their early part of their young manhood, pursuing their dreams. And that is absolutely phenomenal. Right. But the very few of them will actually make it to the big leagues. So if we have 90% make it to the big leagues, probably less than 1% of 90% will not make it to the big leagues. So 10% will. Of those 10%, one will actually stay. Majority will maybe have a cup of coffee, as we say, maybe go up and then go down because it's a constant elevator. But, if most of our players who we're having, even though they're the best at what they do, are going to go end up doing something else in their life, but, they're going to turn around and they're 27, 28, 30 years old. And now all of a sudden what knowledge, skills, and experience have they gained because they're baseball players? They're going to make them a better father, a better husband, a better leader. Right. And frankly, I think with the mental and emotional and the social skills that I deal with are some of the things that translate really well. I think other things that are an innate part of the game, like, teamwork, work ethic, how to take care of yourself, how to take care of your body and your mind. Those are great. I think there's some bonds that are built here that last a lifetime because this is such a tight knit culture and lifestyle. But by and large, I am a big advocate of like these guys. And I think the pandemic taught these guys, because some of them had to go get side hustles. If they didn't have a multi-million-dollar contract or a good signing bonus, they didn't work last year because these guys didn't play for 610 days. Right. So I'm talking to a guy, the other day who, sells Cutco knives. And we're sitting in the bullpen watching the game, BSing about, he's a manager and about leadership and about sales and, about being an entrepreneur and what he learned about, this is what's really cool. What he learned as being a salesman that, in terms of confidence, in terms of leadership, that translated to the baseball field. That was a really aha moment to me, because I think baseball players can have, I don't think they're in the season, but I think the side hustle, if they're doing it right, and we cultivate that, the baseball will feed their other skills, and the other skills will feed baseball and make them better human beings. Better human beings are going to become better baseball players, when they're playing and beyond. Right. Yeah. I think, interestingly, beyond baseball, I'm participating in a really much needed study looking at the transition of baseball players because, obviously I benefited from a lot of the incredible resource throughout in the study and research about transitioning veterans back into the civilian marketplace. We've looked at NFL players and Olympians, but we haven't looked longitudinally at baseball players. And I think we have an incredible opportunity to be able to, those guys to be some incredible ambassadors, athletes back into our industry, right? Beyond having to do anything with baseball.
Well, I literally had written this down about 2 minutes ago, and because the word identity came to mind, where I've had a lot of veterans come on too, and they struggle when they're away because this whole team aspect, this camaraderie, these guys that you'll do anything for, that's now gone, right? You're just kind of out there, and then baseball. I'm sure just like any other team thing, it's the same thing. Hey, you're known as Joe Blow, the baseball player, and when that's gone, that's a big void. So,
it is.
Homeboy selling knives has got something there. He's got, it's great. There's more to life, and there's more to life than just whatever it is you're doing right now.
It really is. I think you make a very great point about identity too, because I think who you are is not what you do.
Yeah,
that's a really important distinction. I didn't understand that until I went through transition, and I'm a little bit different because I always dabbled in other things, right? And I was a consultant. I side hustled in the military when that was like not cool. I don't think it still is. Frowned upon. I definitely didn't talk about it out loud. And although all of my leaders and supervisors always knew it, because they understood that they got it. They knew that what I was doing, it was bringing best practice back to the organization, not only making me better, but making the organization better. Yeah. Right. And then it also was setting me up for my future, because I was going to take the uniform off just like these baseball players do. And I think it puts me in a great position to talk to you guys about that and not shy away from that. Right. Because it's not something we talk about. It's like mental health. We don't talk about it enough, and so having those conversations, and sometimes it goes back to philosophy. Pete Carroll does a phenomenal job of this, him and Michael Gervais. And you hear Pete Carroll talk about it, especially in Win Forever. And, it's reflecting about who am I? What am I all about? What's my mission? So on and so forth. And that takes some dissonance to where you're sitting with your thoughts, you're reflecting, you're setting aside time to be able to do that, really to explore that, because in the go, doggy dog of life, whether it's your baseball, if it's, you're an executive in the rat race, we don't take time to do that enough, because that really helps inform us about what's important, then, how to make informed decisions about, not only what we need, but what we want. And for me, that was settling on being a coach. But had I not had the opportunity to actually slow down as a senior Army officer and reflect on that and really chew on that, it would have been totally different. And I thank God that I've had so many great organizations like the Commit Foundation, like the U.S. Special Operations Command's Care Coalition, that allowed me to cut me loose for 6 months and to really invest in my family and really cross that bridge. Not everybody has that opportunity. And for me, if I could help replicate that in some ways for people to do that, either through one-on-one work or conversations like this, I think, we all transition. The better we can transition, the more likely we're going to get where we want and contribute better. Because, I think there's a reason why there's such a high turnover in organizations. I mean, tenure is 2 years now on average. Wow. In tech and other industries. It's the days of where, my father-in-law who worked for DuPont for 40 years, my dad owned his own business for 40 years. I mean, those guys are long gone. Why is that? Yeah. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. Yeah. But there's definitely a cost associated with that. And it's not always good.
Hey, from your time in the military, working with special operations, working with these elite athletes since then, I want there to be as many, as far as skills that you are teaching them. It's to me, I would think it's almost like habits. You can talk about habits to the most elite entrepreneur or athlete out in the world, but the homeless guy in the street has his own habits. It's something it's a broad spectrum. And so we want to take all the positives that you can. So in these worlds of a guy who is in a batting slump, and we compare that to a person that has, like myself, had a panic attack in front of other people because in public speaking at one time. And from that point on, that kind of haunts me every time I'm up in front of a large group of people. What are some basic tips, something that you can take from the world of the military or sports and help your average person out there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of them is just deliberate discomfort. I mean, leaning into adversity and seeing it as an opportunity to get better. I mean, a lot of people talk about Carol Dweck's research in the book Mindsets, and it's great, but what does that look like, right? And I think perspective really matters. That's your perception is a choice. How you see things, that's your lens, and that influences your perspective, which is your interpretation and your understanding. And that relationship's really important as far as what you experience in different situations. And I think the slump one is a great example because I've experienced the perception of slumps which, is interesting. I recently posted about it. I think you commented about a lot of the research about the hot hand theory and closed loop tasks, like, shooting in basketball. And, that was dismissed as kind of, it's a law of large numbers, and they're not real. And now the research is suggesting otherwise, that, hey, there actually is something to the hot hand, right? And for me, that's all about psychological momentum. But the idea about slumps and hot streaks, they live in your head, right? And you have a choice, you have agency in the matter as far as how you see them, how you understand them, and then how you act and react to as a result of them too. So like, I've been in slumps with, or perceived slumps overseas, when I lost in Iraq, lost a bunch of soldiers, and I missed the birth of my son, Jonah, and I was guilty about being home. And I just, I questioned why I was even there in Iraq. And these guys don't even want to fight for their own damn country. Why the hell am I here? Right. I should be home with my wife, and, how many sons am I actually have? And I missed the birth of one of them. So, yeah. I'm batting 500 in the birth of my sons already, and right, so, right. And I think in baseball, it beats you down even more. And there's a lot of pressure on these guys that I never had. I had such a deep appreciation for the pressure that's on these guys to perform, because it's a hard game. Actually, I'll say it's a simple game played by complex people, as they say, and it's a game of failure built on endurance, right? So being very consistent, means that if you fail 70% of the time, you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. Wow. Literally, what other endeavor that you partake in where failure 70% of the time, it means that you're going to be is really successful. Like, imagine being a surgeon. If 7 out of your 10 patients died, that wouldn't be a success. If I made 70% of my sales goals, in medical device sales, that dog ain't hunting. And so, what other place where you're at, and think about it. And a lot of these guys say, oh, well, you're in the military, you play the ultimate, play the ultimate game where your lives are on the line. I'm like, look, but when I was at home, my livelihood wasn't on the line every time I got up to bat.
Yeah.
Yours is.
Yeah.
You could have a bad outing and you could go down, or you could go up, or you could be out of the game.
Yeah,
that's pressure, man.
They're like, thanks, coach. Thanks. That's what I needed to hear. They're like, if I wasn't thinking about it before, I sure as hell am now.
Yeah, it's all about perspective. Stress is relative, man. And having them have that, understand that, like I'm humbled by that. They put me on this pedestal I don't deserve, right? But it creates these conversations that they otherwise wouldn't have. And I think that when they see themselves from a different perspective, right, I think that's important, right? So if they're in this pressure cooker that's baseball, or failure 70% of the time is success, they can take that same approach to adversity on the outside. I mean, what an advantage they're going to be. I mean, you want to talk about resilient people. Like, I think if they're able to do that psychologically, emotionally, and then influence others socially, you have some amazing people in the workforce.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think that telling people that, because you can't minimize whatever it is, because somebody who's maybe struggling with anxiety, right? And I don't care what it's about, say it's an airplane or being in front of people, in that moment, they might as well be in war. Like, they are going through that whole fight or flight thing. And so it doesn't make it, and maybe war isn't a great comparison, but that's where the brain is tricky. The brain you'll have physical characteristics like you are in a true fight or flight, whether you are or not. It's
that's right.
Yeah, the brain is a funny thing, man.
Isn't it amazing? Yeah, it's just amazing to me that we're exploring outer space and Mars, and but the inner space between the areas is just as much of a mystery and an area of exploration. And I'm just excited to be in that space and be helping people fight that unconventional warfare. It's a forever war, man, but it's worth it.
What are some of your daily practices that add value to your life?
Yeah, I just think reflecting on my values and using that as the benchmark for success, and whether holding myself accountable is really important. I think putting a premium on recovery is now more than ever. I mean, just like a lot of people who were athletes, and I saw myself as, I was a collegiate athlete, then I was a tactical athlete. I love that part of the military, jumping out of airplanes, putting warheads on foreheads, lifting heavy, running hard. I mean, sleep when you die. and, suck it up and drive on. I mean, that was kind of a way of life, and I just wreaked havoc on my body, and I think I look at all the miles that I put on myself, my musculoskeletal system, and then on my brain. I think I put such a big premium on recovery. Some of the things I really geek out on are sleep. We're really good about that in sports science, and put a premium on recovery in terms of health and performance with our athletes. And so I've been using the Oura Ring for a while.
Yep.
I love this biofeedback device. We have readiness competitions, because readiness is an equivalent of like your recovery score plus what your physical activity capability is that day, which is great about this. And so we do get little competitions like that as well too with the guys that I work with. So for me, like making sure I get good sleep, and I have sleep apnea. So I've got my CPAP. My wife calls it the other woman in our relationship, but that makes her as happy as it makes me happy.
Sure.
It was a game changer to understand that as well too. And then meditating daily too. Like I try to meditate. Aura has a great either guided or unguided and kind of short and long versions. So I tried to do that to help, really, bringing my present moment focus, bring meditation in there as well too. That helps out quite a little too. I think the one area that I still haven't cracked the code on is nutrition, especially as an aging guy who still likes to stay active, and so I'm working on that quite a bit too, but that's the next mountain I want to climb, is really dialing in my nutrition.
Dude, I just crushed a 12-inch Italian sub right before we got on the mic. So I feel you.
I love you, man. I still eat like a fullback, man. That's my problem.
I've been in a bulking up phase for some time now. So
the bulk phase. Yeah. Carb loading. Yeah. Forever carb loading.
Yeah. Hey, I know we're starting to run a little short on time. You got to get to the park here soon, but can you give us a quick rundown of what Mission 60 is and your involvement and what that whole thing's about?
Yeah, sure. I love to maybe kind of give a rundown of some of the projects I'm working on.
Sure. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. So Mission 60, I'm still affiliated with them, did a lot of work with them, over the last 10 years. Company that brings the best practices and of special forces and behavioral science together. We wrote a book called Deliver Discomfort. They're doing some really cool stuff. Check out their website at mission60.com. And check out our book. It's on, you can get a hard copy. You can get an audio book. It's available wherever you get your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever. Great book and project that I'm really proud of, and I think it becomes like a manual on how to really get comfortable being uncomfortable and help you and your team get better at what you do. It's definitely not a beat your chest war hero story. It's about real people who did amazing things, but their trials and tribulations and how it can relate to you as the everyday person, right?
Yeah.
Because what makes them special isn't necessarily, the way that they're born. It's the way that they trained and educated themselves and their experiences to craft them who they are as imperfect human beings, as we all are. And they're doing some amazing stuff with the Deliberate Discomfort Challenge, some other things that are really taking off too. Some other things I'm working on is Soldiers of Sidelines, which is a great nonprofit. I'm super passionate about helping veterans get into coaching and athletic coaching. There's a shortage of coaches all over the country. And when you look at how important coaches are, especially in underprivileged areas, like in Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, or urban centers like in Cincinnati, to really help our youth develop into better leaders of character, they can do that through sports. And I think our veterans have such a great value proposition with their leadership experience. They can really help fill that void. And Soldiers of Silence is the best nonprofit, really the only one that helps not only train and educate service members and veterans, but also helps job placement. Very and cool. They have an amazing amount of resources available to that too. And then, those are the big things right there too. And just really excited about my work with the Cincinnati Reds and, a project called Military and Veterans and Players, where we're kind of bringing together those elite populations in baseball, and also from the military, and so we can learn from each other in an immersive way. So more to follow on that. Be sure to watch the game on July 4th versus the Cubs, where that's going to be our official kickoff for that program. So I'm excited about that.
That's awesome, man. If anyone wants to find out more about you, Andy, are you on social, or where can they find you?
I sure am. So yeah, I'm a digital native, but I was loaned my green card by my kids. So it's a license to drive, I guess, carefully. So Yeah, but my Kung Fu is the strongest on LinkedIn, and follow me there. It's Andy, and my last name is Riise. I know that'll be in the show notes. Post a lot there, pretty active. Also on Instagram, post a lot there too. You can find me at CoH_Riise. Also, my company Design to Perform has some information there as well too, and then a little bit on Twitter, but I still haven't cracked that code. Yeah. But you can find me at Andy Riise there as well.
Andy, thanks so much, man. I love the conversation. I know that you and I will be in contact from here on out, and I'm going to be leaning on you as the nonprofit starts to grow, because I think your insight is really, really valuable, man. So I appreciate you spending the time to sit down and talk to me.
Thanks a lot, JT, and I really appreciate you helping influence me and others in a positive way. And we'll see y'all in the arena.
Oh, I love it, man. That's a wrap. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor. Log on to, I don't know, do you log on to Apple? Just go on to Apple, leave a rating, preferably a good one. That'd be awesome. Tell a friend about this. Please log on to the website, consequenceofhabit.com. Hit subscribe, get some exclusive content. And that is it. I will catch you guys all next week.